Welcome to episode 3 of the Mommy+Knitter podcast. I'm Dorothy, and I thank you so much for joining me. Thank you especially to whoever plurked about the show last week. I got a lot of viewers who came over from your plurk, so thank you very much. And if you're new, welcome. I hope you'll stick around to hear what we're talking about. I want to jump right into what's on the needles because I want to spend a good amount of time talking about some finished objects. So I'm going to go through what's on the needles kind of quickly. So first up is the Hermione's Everyday Socks by Erica Lueder. I finished the first sock, and this is out of Creature Comforts Secrets Kept colorway. And I'm knitting it on size 1.5, 2.25 millimeters. And one of the things that is different about this sock is the heel flap. So the designer uses a modified garter heel flap. So you can see the garter rows here. And then the slip stitches, on the knit side, every other row it changes which stitches you're slipping. So it's a little different than what I've done before. I've knit enough socks now that I'm really interested in trying new construction techniques and seeing how they wear versus how what I've been doing wears. And it's good to have a lot of different tools in your toolkit. So this is a new heel flap for me. And I purposely did the one called for in the pattern, although my inclination would be to just do my regular slip stitch heel. But for this pair, and I'm sure I will knit this pattern again because I love the way it shows off the yarn. But I followed the pattern exactly as written. I've started the second sock. I'm just about done with the cuff. So I'll be starting, I think I have one more row of the cuff, and then I'll start the pattern rows. The other sock I have on my needles is knit with the shades of the proverbial knitter yarn from Fishnets. And these are for my husband. So you can see they're striping really nicely. The colors are really beautiful. And these I'm knitting on a size 2 needle, which is, a 2.75 millimeter. And for this, I'm using my 9-inch circular, which I mentioned on my first podcast is my preferred way to knit socks. Especially stockinette socks, because I don't really have to, it's just knitting in the round. So like, I don't even really have to look at what I'm doing. I can just knit, and I don't have to worry so much about losing stitches. It's a lot easier to put down. I don't have to worry about dropping a needle. I tend to drop needles a lot when I'm trying to do patterns on the double pointed. I mean, I'm getting better. I don't know how to magic loop, so I'm sure I could figure it out. I don't really have any, needles with good cables, I think, for magic looping. So for now, this is, for me, the easiest way to knit socks. It is a little bit fiddly the first row or two, and then it gets really easy. So if I continue to knit socks on the size 1.5, or the ones, I will be purchasing some of these just to make my life easier. And finally, the last thing I have on the needles, I'm knitting with my hand spun. This is the Winter's Chill colorway, Polworth Silk from Never Enough Time. You can see it's not in a pretty cake. When I thwacked the yarn after I washed it, the ties came undone. So it was a bit of a tangly mess. It took me quite a while, but I have this ball, and I cast on for, I've got a tangle, a Lacy Bactus by Terry Montonin. So I chose to do this because I thought that the eyelet details would help distract your eye from any inconsistencies in the yarn, but still really show off the colors. And you can see just the shades of blue and a little bit of white. I think it's really pretty. So the Bactus scarf, you start off, you weigh your ball of yarn, and it's knit triangularly, as you can see. And you increase until you've used up half the ball of yarn by weight, and then you decrease. So it really helps to use every last bit of yarn that you have to get a shawl as long as possible, or as deep as possible. So I'm really excited about this. It's not getting a lot of attention. I do a few rows here or there. I will say it's an 8-row pattern. I thought I was going to have to really focus on which row I was on or keep track, but because you can easily count the garter rows in between the lacy section, it's really easy. So that's what's on the needles. I have 2 finished objects to show you. the first of which you haven't seen. I cast on, when did I cast this on? Thursday maybe, and finished it up on Sunday. So this is the February Baby Bonnet, and it is by Margot Erdman. I knit it out of Cascade 220 Superwash, the worsted weight, on size 6, 4mm needles. So if you haven't seen the other podcast, my best friend had triplets in October, and I'm knitting their Christmas caps. So the two boys got just kind of plain stockinette caps with a little seed stitch brim and tie. But the little girl is getting something a little lacy. And I had knit the boys out of the Cascade 220 Sport and had expected to do the same for the girls' bonnet. But this pattern called for worsted, and I happened to have had like 3/4 of a skein of the worsted weight in white in my stash. I had just enough yarn. So the way this is knit, you do the back in the round, you know, a little circle, and then you switch to working back and forth for the lace, and then you go back and pick up stitches for the ribbing. And when I bound off the ribbing, I had maybe 1.5 inches of yarn left. I was really nervous the last row. You know, better too much, 1.5 inches extra yarn than 1.5 inches not enough. So this still needs ties, ribbons to be the ties, and then they'll go off in the mail in time for the christening. Okay, and now my big finished object. I finished the Taiga Cowichan. I took a steeking class last Saturday. The steeking class was really great. And get this, I ran into someone I took a class at Rhinebeck with, and I ran into someone from my town, and we're new. I don't think I've mentioned, we bought a house last August, and we moved from about, 10 minutes from downtown Boston to now we're about an hour away from downtown Boston. But we went from a 2.5 bedroom apartment to a 5-bedroom house with a big yard. So we're thrilled. We love it here. But I haven't met a ton of people. I met, moms and stuff from school on the bus stop, and I've made friends, but I haven't met knitters. So I was really excited to meet someone from my hometown at this class. Okay, so anyways, steeking. So the steeking part, way easier than I thought it was going to be. I might never knit a sweater flat again. Like if there's a button band that you put on afterwards, I might steek everything. I'll have to think about that. So here it is. Let me see if I can get it so you can see it nicely. I think it came out really well. The only problem with it doesn't fit. So I could tell after I steeked it, it fits fine in the shoulders. It's the circumference. That's the problem. So I added extra width to the button band, which I thought would help. And it totally helps in the stockinette section. It does not help in the colorwork section. So I want to talk a little bit about where I went wrong so that you can avoid the same mistakes. So the first thing is gauge. I knit a gauge swatch. I knit a substantially sized gauge swatch. I washed it. I laid it out to dry the same way I was going to lay the sweater out to dry, and I totally got gauge. I never checked my gauge once I started knitting the sweater. So my gauge on this sweater is, let me look, I wrote it down, 4 stitches to the inch in the stock, in both sections. So when I went up a needle size in the color work, I did the stockinette in a 10 and the color work in a 10.5. I wound up getting the same gauge, so that's great. The pattern calls for 3.5 stitches an inch. So I was off by 1/2 inch, which, yeah, is not a big deal for 1 inch. It's a big deal for 36, 38, and 40 inches. So, lesson number 1, when I start knitting sweaters and I get a ways into it, I should probably take out my little gauge checker thing and check gauge. The other issue and why it works, why increasing the button band worked in the stockinette and not the color work, is that color work doesn't stretch horizontally, or at least not very much, because of all the floats. So you have 2 yarns that are kind of holding it in, and so it just doesn't stretch. Okay, So the thing is this, I can get it shut at the top. I can wear it straight with just it hanging open, which you've seen. I mean, how many sweaters do you see that only have? Even this sweater doesn't call for a whole row of buttons. It calls for two buttons. So I will do that. I will have to rip out the button band. So you can see that the button band comes down on an angle, and it does the same on both sides. And it is not the way I'm holding the sweater. Do you see how it comes down? So the directions call for picking up a stitch for every row for the button band. If you read most sweater patterns, they tell you to pick up 2 stitches for every 3 rows. And that's typically done, and the reason it's done, so a knit stitch is not a perfect square. The ratio of the height to the width is 2 to 3. So by picking up 2 stitches for every 3 rows, you're accounting for the height and width difference in this section for this section. Does that make sense? If you pick up for every single row, this is what you get. You get a button band that's actually longer than the sweater. So when I'm not so distraught about the sweater not fitting, I will rip out the button band and do it again, picking up 2 stitches for every 3 rows, which really I should have done to begin with. Like, that's something I do know better. I want to say thank you to Patricia in Norway, who offered to help me find clasps when I mentioned I wasn't sure what I was going to use. But I'm fortunate that when I took this steeking class, I found clasps. So let me see. Aren't they cute? So they'll actually go horizontally. It's just hard to show you what they look like. But I feel like they really match the sweater well. So I have, whoops, I dropped one. I have 2 sets of those, so they'll go here and here. And like I said, I can wear the sweater, but it's not going to be it's going to be an around the house kind of thing to keep me warm, as opposed to this great wardrobe staple that I hoped it would be. Live and learn, you know? So lessons, check your gauge as you're knitting. And, if you know anything about garment construction, or you've constructed a lot of sweaters and something in directions don't seem quite right, consider changing it, or email the designer, or check out the projects on Ravelry to see what other people have done differently. I don't usually, I don't know a lot of things, and so I don't usually, I tend to follow patterns, but I should be more willing to take risks and trying what I think I know. Does that make sense? What I think I know, what I'm pretty sure I know. So last but not least, I do have a little bit of stash enhancement. This is Creature Comforts Exit Pursued by a Bear. And this is the second colorway in the Winter's Tale Club, the Bardic Circle Club for the Winter's Tale. Exit Pursued by a Bear is a stage direction. So it's beautiful. It's 460 yards? 460 yards. So I'll have to decide what I'm going to cast on with this. Finally, I've had a few questions about opening a Ravelry group. And I guess I'm curious if you're interested in a Ravelry group. I'd love to host one. I'd love to do some knit-alongs and get to know who's watching and hear what other people are knitting on. But I don't want to open it if people aren't really that interested. So either drop me a message on Ravelry or comment on the blog. And thanks so much for joining me, and have a great week. I'll see you next Monday.